Hi all, thank you very much for joining us today again. This time we will continue our discussions on epistemology, ethics, and politics. Today's essay is the obliteration of capitalism. And let me start to introduce that topic with the all-time story of the emperor's new clothes. As you know, it's a story about this emperor who gets clothes that aren't really clothes or nothing. And he walks around being naked. And many people pretend that the emperor is naked, that he's clothed while they indeed see him naked. And it is until a kid that says that the emperor is naked that many people pull off their strings and really realize and start saying that he's naked. But let me make a little trick to that story. What would happen if the people that realize that the king is naked would have started to say that he isn't really naked and that he really is having a new type of clothing, and that they would have to be more aligned with the people that do say that he's clothed, and we're starting to say things to appease the people who had clothes. What would you say of them? What would be your opinion of them? And where is a kid who will say the true thing? Now, to discuss this, we have James Valliant. He's the author of Creating Christ and the Passion of Ignorance Critics. And to the people who are watching this live, feel free to ask questions through a super chat feature on YouTube. We will track it live. Okay, James, let's start. What is this essay trying to tackle?
Well, it's called The Obliteration of Capitalism, and Ayn Rand well names her essays, but she could have subtitled this one with Friends Like This, Who Needs Enemies? Because what she's not so much talking about are socialists and communists or fascists directly, but the response to it by the so-called capitalist or freer West, the intellectuals and the defenders of capitalism. Who is responsible really for the collapse of capitalism? Who is responsible for the increasing socialist controls that are coming from government, it seems, in Western, so-called Western capitalist governments? Is it the left or is it the right? And when we look at it historically, who is really responsible? Is it the hardcore Republicans who weren't perfect by any means and didn't have Ayn Rand's ethics by any means, men like Barry Goldwater or something? Was it he who was responsible, or is it these others, these compromisers, these people who don't understand capitalism, have caved in basically on all the moral issues, and are now adopting the very language of the left in an attempt to sort of stave them off? It kind of reminds me, I don't mean to mix your metaphor, because your Emperor's New Clothes is a classic one. It's as though the left says socialism is this great thing. Look at how beautiful the emperor's clothes are. And in effect, the right has agreed. Yes, that is a fine suit of clothes. There's no question the emperor has the best suit of clothes around. And it's not as much as we'd like. You see, it's only, or it's just partial, but once you've conceded that the emperor is wearing something, you've conceded in effect the entire case. You may not believe that the emperor is in some gorgeous, beautiful regalia. You might believe that, well, no, there's got some holes in it and it's threadbare and he's not really, fully dressed, but he's got clothes on, even though he's stark naked. That's in effect what's going on here. The right, if you look at history, in both Britain and the United States, uh, for example, when the Great Depression happened in my country, a lot of people believed that Franklin Roosevelt, the president, who imposed big new government spending programs and big new welfare programs, a retirement insurance program called Social Security, that in increasing the government and making it much more of a mixed toward socialism economy, he had saved capitalism. He had saved capitalism by imposing, for the first time, vast new welfare state programs. What an interesting position. Rather than having conceded capitalism and stepped away from capitalism for the first significant step in our history, he saved capitalism. Or take British history. The first Labour Prime Minister in Great Britain, Ramsay MacDonald, got there because of the support of the Tories. It was the Tories who worked with him. It was Baldwin who worked with Ramsay MacDonald to make him prime minister 2 times. Sure, the British left looks back on him as a big compromiser and so forth, and not doing what Keynes really would have wanted in the wake of the Great Depression and so forth. But they all look back on him now a little bit with a bit more fondness. Hey, after all, he was the first guy who got us down the path toward labor governments in Great Britain. Was it so much the Ramsay MacDonalds and the FDRs, or was it the Tories and the conservatives who conceded the case to the left-wingers? Move fast forward to the 60s. Ayn Rand is talking about Governor George Romney of Michigan, who's talking not about capitalism. We're not capitalists anymore. We're consumerists now. The consumer is king, ignoring, of course, the role of the producer. In effect, the capitalist side had thrown in the towel on capitalism. And you can see it with Governor Romney, by the way, the father of Mitt Romney, the American senator and presidential candidate in our time. Was it the George Romneys who caved in to socialists who were on the Republican side, who were thought to be saving capitalism, who are most responsible? Or is it actually the naked socialists who are responsible? Ayn Rand is putting the moral blame on the right. They did not have a valid ethical or epistemological defense of capitalism. They had, in effect, caved in on the moral issue, so that it's like the old joke about prostitute. Man walks up to a woman, will you sleep with me for $1 million? Well, sure. Well, will you sleep with me for $5? Well, what do you think I am? And the response, natural response, of course, is we've established what you are. Now we're just dickering over the price. And very much so, that was the case. Ayn Rand viewed conservatives and the so-called defenders of capitalism in just the same way. They had, in effect, conceded the entire point the minute they made a moral compromise with the welfare state and the left's altruism.
Thank you. And I was wondering if we could start at the beginning. And that's one crucial concept that Ayn Rand talks about, and I think we haven't covered in this series, and that's anti-concepts. Could you explain a bit more what they are, and then maybe I'll try to take this to capitalism antagonists.
Ayn Rand was very keen about the meaning of concepts. She had an entire theory of concepts. And so there's things that look like concepts, but really aren't concepts at all. They are neither necessary, right, nor useful. You can use a concept like God or ghost. There is no referent in reality to God or ghost. They are unnecessary, useless concepts which can only be used to confuse and to further, obscure matters. No doubt about it, right? When you go into politics, anti-concepts are rife, and they tend to be these package deals which include things that don't really belong together in the same concept, that make them both without referent, just empty in effect and useless, and an unnecessary thing. But that package deal cannot allow them to get away with the obliteration of an actual concept in politics. Take, for example, the concept extremism. Now, most people, when they think extremism, oh, you mean some violent revolutionary who's out to throw bombs, some terrorist. But no. Extreme in the sense of ideas, an extreme defense of liberty and justice and rights. What about that kind of extremism? No. All extremism is bad. Compromise is necessary. Nobody's moral principles are pure, so we all just sort of have to compromise. So extremism is a great example of an anti-concept here. In Governor Romney's case, consumerism is an amazing anti-concept. It's as if the right-wing defenders of sort of the vague American system understand that in a vague way, capitalism sort of delivers the goods to consumers. But they've conceded the moral case about the moral role of producers, how they have a right to their profits, how their lives are an end in themselves too. And once you've conceded, in effect, this point of consumerism, ignoring the real value of the free market capitalism. In fact, he's getting rid of the concept capitalism in favor of this other concept, which admits to a vast area of the welfare state. As governor of Michigan, George Romney, by the way, vastly increased taxes in the tax base in Michigan. He became an opponent of Barry Goldwater's in 1964. He became Richard Nixon's first Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He believed that capitalism needed to compromise significantly with the left. And it was based on his own religious ethics, his Mormonism. The right was completely disarmed ethically and epistemologically to the left, to the left's view that what happens to the least among us, as Christ might say in the Bible, is the test. And if you're not willing to enslave people to help the poor, there's something morally deficient with you. And in effect, the right has conceded that point. It's now dickering over how much is required or how much we should do, how much we can afford. It's simply a pragmatic argument from the right. How can we really afford all that welfare? Take the current infrastructure bill that the Senate just approved. Now, this is the sort of infrastructure bill that the government the federal government, certainly in my country, has no business engaged in. It's $1 trillion larded with all kinds of stuff that'll have nothing to do with bridges and stuff. But it's the kind of program that Trump could have signed. It's the kind of program where a bunch of Republicans in the Senate are getting on board with. The right has, in effect, conceded the moral point, and now it's just a question of degree, not kind. It's the obliteration of capitalism as a consistent principle.
I would like to return to the consequences of this, and particularly trying to see how these concessions lead to a less idealistic and less intellectual right. But I was hoping, what are the defenders of capitalism seeking by these kind of concessions? Are they seeking approval? Why is the opinion of others so important to them?
Well, I think there's really two answers. One is fear. One is simply fear. There are conservatives in this country who kind of know in their hearts that capitalism is the only fair system, the one that's better off for most people, and yet they're afraid of a violent mob. In the 1920s, this was particularly so, and I think that the reason why Britain got a Ramsay MacDonald or the United States got a Franklin Roosevelt was precisely because much of the right feared a violent revolution such as had just happened in the Soviet Union, the Bolshevik Revolution. That's become less of an excuse. I don't think that Britain or the United States are in any danger of having a communist revolution outright at this point. On the other hand, part of it was just fear, the threat. But there's a much deeper answer, because even fear can't explain their reaction. They basically did not disagree with the moral premises. The left had disarmed them by using age-old Christian altruist premises that the right had no response to. No response to. They, in effect, had conceded the moral point. And, in class-structured Britain, you could see the Tories kind of saying, well, yeah, our position isn't exactly a fair free market one with our titles and lands and stuff. So they were amenable to the idea, this kind of collectivist altruist thinking was always in their mind. And Christians in America, the Christian right, very similarly. You have conservatives in my country who are no. We're just as Christian. We care about the poor too, and it's my Christian faith that motivates me. ... So the deeper answer here is that the so-called defenders of capitalism had a bad morality, a morality which concedes the principle to the left in socialism from the outset, and they really didn't know how to draw the line. So that the left is just ever more insatiable in their demands, and the right really has no moral response to it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think one of the things that I think Rand is assuming in this essay is that people would be responsive to a more pro-capitalistic ideology and rhetoric from the leaders, right? Because in other case, she would say, well, people aren't that for this, but let's analyze the people who are just proposing these kind of things. But in this case, she sees it from all sides, right?
Well, she's right. Reality is on her side. The only just system is a system of individual rights. The only just system is a system of individual rights. It is also, by the way, the only system that really delivers the goods. That is to say, it's the best system for everyone, including the poor, at the end of the day. But the fundamental moral justification is that it's the only moral system. It's the only system that recognizes the individual freedom of human beings and their right to the product of their own labor, their right to engage in voluntary exchange. Now, people will respond to that if they understand it. They will respond to it morally and ethically, and they will see the practical ramifications, that it does mean general prosperity for the society, that people are mostly better off under capitalism than under any other system. But that's a ramification of it. And absent this moral justification that I think people would respond to if they were given a consistent moral, it's remarkable how people for example, in the United States and in Great Britain responded to the economic crisis of the 70s, the stagflation, the malaise, the crisis of socialism in Great Britain, or the crisis of the welfare state in the United States. How did they respond? They responded with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Not that they were perfect vehicles for the defense of capitalism. They too had conceded the moral point in effect. But at least there was a shift to the right where the ordinary people, and what was interesting is that this wasn't coming from intellectual elites or from the richest members of the society. In both America and Great Britain, it was ordinary middle-class people who put Thatcher and Reagan there. People know, moral people who support themselves and respect the law of causality, earn their own living, understand the importance of individualism even without the philosophical concepts Ayn Rand gave them, know that it's the better system, know it's the more fair system. They really do. That's fading, as Ayn Rand called it, as basically an American sense of life, or a freedom sense of life that is very much faded from the West and fading sadly from America, which once very much stood for individualism and freedom.
Thank you. Another issue, it's about the capitalism antagonists, and partially this essay is right afterwards. She's writing it right after she writes one on extremism, which is criticizing capitalism's antagonists. And she, in this one, says something interesting, which I was hoping that you could explain. And that she says that they are trying to smuggle statism through anti-concepts. And she also touches right that the same concept with her critique to Kennedy, when she says something like, well, there's going to be a time when statism is, when freedom means statism and Americanism means serfdom, or something like that. Could you explain a bit more on that, just to be for seeing the other side?
Right. As I started out with, what they do is they take these concepts, and they did it from the start, and corrupt them. For example, the new welfare state is a defense of capitalism. It saved capitalism. It protects freedom. And so that's what a lot of these anti-concepts will do, is by creating this package deal, by putting together two things that don't belong together conceptually into a new concept, it's meant to destroy the real meaning of the other. So in an Orwellian newspeak way, freedom becomes slavery, right? And the terms turn upside down. You'll find some of these composite concepts, like we had a recent president, George Bush, compassionate conservatism, compassionate capitalism. Well, the one is undermining the other, as if we need to have, sort of a foot in the door for the very opposite. And once you put the foot in the door for the very opposite, of course, undermine the entire principle, and we're back to the prostitute dickering over price, aren't we? Extremism is one. Consumerism is another. Compassionate conservatism is another. All of these ideas, which are in effect advocating for the very opposite of what the concept is supposed to be defending. Boy, that's everywhere these days, isn't it? We're defending, the right will say we're defending capitalism with our new regulation. And you really can see it with a lot of the so-called defenders of capitalism. People like Milton Friedman in his life, he basically conceded the idea of the welfare state. We need guaranteed income for everybody. and that if we can get away with appeasing the guaranteed income for everybody, we've in effect defended the free market. Now, how do you do that? How do you defend the free market when you've completely undermined the principle? Now, anything his socialist opponents might propose is simply, again, dickering over the price. You think that everyone should have a minimum guaranteed income. Well, why shouldn't they have free college education? Why shouldn't they have every, free vacations or free multi-room personal dwellings? The sky's the limit on the insatiable maw that is the left. Once you've conceded the principle at all, once you've conceded that capitalism is consistent with and capitalism can work fine with, you've put the foot in the door for control and socialism, and really it's just a matter of time before the left demands it all.
There's something related to what you were saying about Bush, and that's the idea that people perceive that this propaganda pro-capitalism is hiding something evil because there's something wrong there. Like every time that they do propaganda, instead of making capitalism more popular, they make it more dirty. Why is that?
Oh my gosh, every time you see a corporation taking out some public service ad saying, oh, we don't make any profit. Well, see how little? See, when it comes to our revenues, we're paying in dividends, we're paying to the employees, we've increased wages and benefits for our employees. And look how it's our product, we're really sacrificing to get our product into these small rural areas. We are really just social welfare institutions as corporations. We're not here to make a profit. And look at the teeny little profit we make. And we give it to our dividend holders and we plow it back into our company. And that's all we're really doing. No, that is not the way to defend capitalism or profit. Or look at the way they've attacked Elon Musk. Here is a guy who earns a small fraction of the benefit that he gives the world, right? Or like Bezos getting as profit for himself a teeny fraction of the benefit that he's offering the entire world. He spends his own money that he's earned on some space mission and he gets attacked. Well, you're not solving world hunger. You're going into outer space on some lark, wasting your money, as if it wasn't his money to do it with. As if it wasn't his money to do it with, until and unless the right can stand up and defend profits and say, no, my gosh, Bezos and Musk are taking too little. They're only taking a teeny little amount of the benefit they're giving the world. And instead of saying it's their profit, they earned it, they're getting only a teeny bit of it, right? Until someone can say, and they can do with their money what they want to do with their money. Until there's a moral defense of selfishness, until there's a moral defense of private property, capitalism is doomed. It is a slippery slope down some form of horrible collectivism.
What do you think about those conservatives who say, I agree that people have the right to everything that they earn, everything they get, but it is their responsibility to give it away. Like, they have all these rights, but there's something morally different where they have to give it up. But right. That's
right. As if the only moral justification for their profit, for their success, is how they immediately turn it over to others and help others with it. The only moral justification they could possibly have in doing something for their own benefit is to benefit others. None of it can be theirs. Not theirs, pure selfish. No. That's bad. You see, they've conceded, both the right and the left have conceded the moral point, and that's where the issue is. The issue here, and it goes all the way back to the Christian altruists, the Christian socialists of the early 19th century. I mean, before there were Marxist socialists, there were Christian socialists who basically saw the relationship between altruism and socialism, and they have morally disarmed the right altogether until and unless the right in the West loses connection and respect for Christian altruism or Kantian dutyism, until they stand up for an individual's right to live for his own sake, his own right to make profit for himself and his own life and happiness. As an end in itself, capitalism is doomed. They've in effect conceded the principle. The only way to defend capitalism is on a moral basis, not an economic one. One that says that the creative thought and the hard work of men like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos means that their profit is theirs. They've earned it, and they don't have to give it away to anyone. They can enjoy it. They can go to space if they're interested in it. With it, it's theirs. Their profit. They earned it.
There's another thing that I found really interesting, and I think I'm going to translate it to more actual terms. She talks more about well, there's the U.S. permits hunger. She's talking about another essay, and this guy is saying like, well, people don't like us because they say that the U.S. permits hunger. And the way that I've seen that today is, it's Europeans saying that the US has the worst healthcare system in the world. But when Cuba goes and does all that horrible things that they do, they say, okay, they have the best healthcare system in the world. What do you think about that?
How sick is that? And that tells you the whole epistemological twisted nature of the debate. Oh, they can be a dictatorship. They can suppress free speech. They can put political enemies into prison and torture them. Oh, sure, that's no problem. But you know something? They provide medical care to everybody. First of all, the medical care they provide is of a very low quality in any case. It's simply the moral principle that the government is willing to provide medical care to everybody. Now, of course, in my country, medical care gets delivered to everybody. Anybody, regardless of their insurance status, regardless of their status altogether, who walks into an emergency room in a hospital in America gets treated, regardless of their ability to pay. And on the other end of things, wealthy Europeans still come to America to get the finest medical treatment in the world. But that's not the point here. The point is the system in America doesn't guarantee by law, by federal law, that everyone gets the same medical care. That's morally inferior to a dictatorship that suppresses free speech and has political prisoners in jail getting tortured. Doesn't that reveal everything? It's not the facts of reality. It's not a true love of humanity. No, it's the moral principle that everyone is everyone else's slave if there's one person who's sick and not getting cared for. And we have a right to put a gun to your head if there's someone anywhere in the world who's not getting guaranteed medical treatment. It's like food in America. Of course, America has the best fed population in the world. We have the most overweight poor people in the world. Most overweight poor people in the world. Because, of course, the vast majority in America are abundantly fed, even the poor. So to say that America's system is a system where people aren't guaranteed food, of course, that's not quite true either. We have federal programs like food stamps and aid to families with dependent children. So that's not even true about America. But even if you were to make the comparison, America's got the fattest poor people on earth. Yeah, this place where we don't guarantee everyone a meal. No, they don't care about humanity. It's not the facts on the ground that matter. It's the moral principle that absolutely trumps any reality. If you cared about the poor, of course, you'd be in favor of Western free market capitalism. It's the only system that's ever done a damn thing to help the poor in any way, shape, or form. So as Ayn Rand long said, if it was concern for the poor that motivated the left, they would have embraced some kind of capitalism long ago, right? No. It's not really the condition of the poor that they care about. No. It's the condition, as Jane Addams, the social worker, said after she visited the American social worker, after visiting the Soviet Union in the 1920s and 30s, came back and said, "Isn't it wonderful how everyone is equally shabby?" See, the equality is far more important than the quality of clothes that anyone has. The point here is a moral one, not a practical one. And that's why the issue here is a moral one, not a practical one.
And you talk about torture and being in the NHS here. It's like torture every time that I try to get any service from them. It's crazy.
Right. No, people waiting weeks and weeks and weeks for some kind of diagnostic procedure. Weeks and weeks and weeks, months and months and months for some kind of corrective treatment. No, obviously when you go about it that way, you're going to hurt the overall health of the country. But that's so even if their collectivism was the justification, they're getting worse collective outcomes. They're getting worse collective, but that's really not the focus, is it? It's a moral issue to them. And it's the same on the right. And that's why the right has conceded the point, even when they see the practicality in many cases of capitalism. See, it just works out better when companies are allowed to pursue their selfish profit. We'll all get the spillover, and they're trying to find some weird ethical backwards justification. See, we get the spillover from this capitalist greed and selfishness. Talk about an anti-concept greed, improperly defined. But you see, that's the point. Is it's the morals of it. We'd rather have everyone be fair. We'd rather fairly treated, and that means equity. That means equality of outcome. We don't want anyone who's too rich. That would be a morally poor, morally bad outcome as far as they're concerned, despite the differences in people's efforts and moral responsibility. No, that shouldn't be reflected in economic outcomes. Everyone should be the same. That's more important. Psychologically, you ask what's the cause? Well, there are people who, as Ayn Rand pointed out, are afraid of the law of cause and effect, afraid of the responsibility of living and taking on that responsibility of living. There are people who find psychological comfort in joining the herd and being cared for. And that's really, I guess, at the psychological level, what's going on. At the ethical level, their rationalization for that is this altruist ethics, which conservatives need to reject if they're ever going to defend capitalism. Adam Smith, moral philosopher, the first great defender of capitalism in economics, could not understand how it is that the selfishness of certain individuals could redound to the general benefit of the whole of society. To him, it was a paradox. It's no paradox at all. When people are free to pursue their individual well-being, the society will be better off, because society is no more than you and me and every other individual. It's the ethics of this that needs to be understood and has never been understood by free market defenders from Adam Smith to Milton Friedman.
I was trying to get one of the quotes that surprised me the most about this, but I didn't find it. And basically, it is referring to altruism as such, but she introduces a concept that we have sometimes touched in this series, but not in the same way. And basically, she says that she talks about hatred of being successful in life, but for some reason she says that leads to a feeling of hatred of the good for being the good. Could you explain the concepts and maybe why is there a difference in the way that she says them?
Right. Well, Ayn Rand uses envy in a very particular sense. She does not mean jealousy in the most common, perhaps, use of the term jealousy. You've got something cool and I want it, so I'll work to get it and I'll have it for myself too. Not the, hey, you've got something cool that inspires me kind of jealousy, but envy, the desire that no one have it if I can't have it. There really is. And it's hard, I think, for benevolent Westerners particularly to grasp. It certainly was hard for me to grasp the idea that there are people in this world who hate the good for being the good. And full stop. They're good. They're better than me. They're virtuous. That's bad. That needs being taken down. That needs being destroyed. Why? It's an affront to me. It's an assault on me and my self-esteem. And am I worthy? Am I living up? See, I may never be a Jeff Bezos in my productive capacity, but in my own way, my own independence and my own production can support my life and then some. The idea that people can stand, most people are perfectly capable of standing on their own 2 feet and taking care of themselves. That's a threat. That's a, hey, I'm expected to take care of myself. I'm not secure about that. And that has its reflection across the board. This guy is rich, and that is an affront to my own feeling of insecurity. This psychology produces not merely a sort of jealousy of the rich, but an envy, a resentment of the fact that he is rich, even if he earned it, even if he came from poverty himself, like Andrew Carnegie or John Rockefeller or Thomas Edison and Henry Ford. They all came from poverty, became the richest men in America through their own creative thought and hard work. Now that very concept that a man could do that on his own through his own creative thought and hard work stands as an affront to them. That has to be challenged and obliterated. He has no right to live for his own sake. He has no right to do that, even if it means the benefit of everyone else on the planet. No, I'd rather take him down to my level, right? Than permit the idea that he exists for himself and is the source of the benefits for everyone else. It's an astonishing thing. It's a hatred of the good for being the good, a kind of envy and resentment that it's hard for benevolent people to wrap their heads around. But there's only one way to explain something like Jane Addams' comment. Isn't it wonderful that everyone's equally shabby? At least we don't have, I've heard this a million times. Well, at least in some of these socialist countries, they don't have billionaires and multi-billionaires like they do in America. Wow. So you'd rather really have a poorer country for the middle class if it didn't involve having these greedy billionaires at all. That's not love of humanity. That's not love of life. That's not a quest for prosperity. And because what it does is it ignores the individual. It ignores the individual's role, his virtue in achieving what he wants, his values, his ability to do so. That whole idea is threatening, challenging, and psychologically uncomfortable for the psychologically dependent, insecure, and the power lusting.
One of the things that surprised me many times, the way that people start saying political things, is something like, you show some things that are desirable for many people, like I have a beautiful house, I have a beautiful car, and they try to criticize you for that. And the real answer should be, what do you expect from me? That I shouldn't have it? Isn't it desirable? Maybe it's desirable that many people have it, but why are you criticizing me for that?
Some people haven't even grasped the idea of production. Some people really believe in a zero-sum gain sort of thing, that if someone has something, it came at the expense of someone else. If there's a rich man, it's only because he's impoverished the poor, not realizing poverty is the natural state, and someone's got to create the wealth to become wealthy in the first place. No, so part of it is a failure to grasp the role of production itself. But I think, again, the deeper issue is the role of the individual and his right to his own life. Is your life an end in itself? Do you have a right to pursue your greatest happiness, to find love with the most beautiful person who's compatible with you, to find material well-being in a nice home or a nice car, to have good things? That is a hatred of the good for being the good. If it's saying, you, Alejandro, there's something wrong with you because you got these good things, even if you earned them, even if every single thing you did was simply taking a little bit of your profit and enjoying your life with it. No, you have no right to that. And it's the right to that. It's the right to live for your own sake that motivates both left and right in a negative way. No, we are slaves. We owe some duty to it's our social responsibility in some way. Of course, there can be no unchosen obligations. None of us is born a slave or in debt. When I discharge my debts value for value, I have completely met my social obligations in this regard. Anything else is slavery, some form of slavery, isn't it? But that's in effect the silent premise behind both left and right. We are, to some extent, our brother's keepers, and to some extent, the government can pull out their guns and enslave us for the alleged well-being of others, because none of us as individuals has a right to live for our own sake, our own happiness, our own well-being at all. But of course, any benevolent view of the future has to understand that that is what prosperity means. Individuals bringing their own lives into order, providing the values they most want for their lives. It's the only way to understand it.
Thank you. Just for reference, the paragraph that I was trying to search is one that says, uh, she's talking about something that I'm going to ask you later, but it's when one grasps this, one knows that there is no use of arguing over political trivia or wondering about the nature of altruism and why the reign of the altruist is leading the world to an ever widening spread of horror. This is the nature of altruism. This, and not sort of benevolence, goodwill, or concern for human misfortune. Hatred of man, not desire to help him. Hatred of life, not the desire to further it. Hatred of the successful state of life. And the ultimate apocalyptic evil, hatred of the good for being the good.
Why? How can you say more to that? Because that's it. When a person like Steve Jobs develops Apple Computer and develops these amazing products, and it's really clearly the result of just amazing products, innovation, cutting edge technology, user-friendly devices, beautifully made devices. He made a fortune by providing people a really solid value. He deserves every dime he earned. And more than that, he gave more value and took just a teeny unfair segment of the value that he gave the world through all that. To resent wealth when it comes from someone like that, as opposed to wealth when it comes from some government bureaucrat or someone who gets favor. Joe Biden's family gets millions of dollars from foreign corporations because they're influence peddling, or some medieval lord, take an anti-concept like robber baron. See, they never really, in Europe, I think to some extent, they never really separated the idea that there's these people who are rich because they're in effect actual robbers, like the medieval nobility of Europe. They're looters, they're thugs, versus peacefully productive people who are offering a voluntary value in exchange. And that's the only way they're getting rich. If you can't make that distinction, right? If you can make that distinction, then obviously Jobs is a superhero. He should be allowed every dime of his profit. He has done nothing but benefit the rest of us, but that's not the justification. The justification is that he had a right to live for his own sake, to make profit, to be happy. I mean, the only way he had of doing that is to appeal to the selfishness of consumers. Right? So while the idea, again, this, consumerism, Ayn Rand points out, wouldn't it be better to be thinking about the producer? Isn't capitalism more like producerism? Now, neither is really the essential definition of capitalism. Capitalism is the system that defends individual rights. But what consumerism is this amazing thing, is if we can ignore the producer, the goods are here, Mr. Reardon, we can ignore all the causes of actual economic growth and progress and the creation of wealth. And what really matters is, are consumers getting delivered to them what's fair?
The previous paragraph that it was referring to is a paragraph referring to the something on the other essay that she comments, which says something like, hey, all these countries, all these Islamic countries in Middle East Africa are saying, okay, we're the real socialists. Socialism is great. Mohammed was actually an Islamist, and we have the concept first. And this guy says something like, we're losing these people. Why don't we change the concept of capitalism?
Yes, once more, a Sulzberger columnist for the New York Times comes under Ayn Rand's criticism and wrath. She was particularly effective at it. This guy, Sulzberger, in his column that she's talking about, is talking about how, hey, gee, we're losing the PR battle for Western capitalism here. And look at how socialism is not being defined in terms of totalitarianism or communism or fascism, but it's being defined just in terms of a vague welfare of statism, and right. And so, how do we meet this PR battle? We meet the PR battle by defending the West's economic system on the altruist terms of the socialists, literally. Well, once you've done that, you've completely conceded the case. Once you've done that, you've completely conceded the case. And what's interesting here is that Ayn Rand, of course, is implicitly pointing out that, yes, socialism is altruism, which is the primordial politics and economics of our savage past. Indeed, when African leaders are saying, hey, socialism, we in Africa have always been practicing in our region socialism, he's got a point. The ancient collectivist tribalism of much of Africa wasn't the execution of altruism in local politics, or in East Asia. Hey, this is Buddhism. Socialism really is Buddhism when you look at it. It's no different than in the West when you've got Christians saying, look, Marxism is no different than Christian ethics enforced politically. Yeah, it is primordial statism, primordial collectivism and tribalism that's always been there. Now it's fancy, gussied up Marxist pseudo-intellectual justification. But the point is that the right has basically conceded the case. They're in favor of traditional ideas. They're in favor of Christianity and the collective family traditions around the world. So our columnist says, if we want to defend the West, we've got to basically concede the tribal ancient collectivism of Asia and Africa because it's morally correct too. Wow. Wow. That is a complete capitulation to, in effect, the Dark Ages and the anti-civilization viewpoint in the name of ethics. In the name of ethics.
One of the interesting things is that the guy mentions Tunisia's dictator. I don't know if he was really a dictator, but his leader. And he ended up killing several Islamists at the end of his reign. But I was wondering if we could change this conversation to something more actual. And I was one of the things that I think it's true, but maybe that should be my first question is, every time that conservatives get out of office and get in and try to get in back, they're less and less and less intellectual than last time. Do you think that this is a consequence of this? And do you think that the Trump phenomenon, which is basically very, very unintellectual, is a consequence of these waves?
Well, I think that part of the answer lies in the fact that you're better people in the West, people who work for their own living, business people, ordinary people trying to get by in life. They have never really appreciated the role of capitalism or understood the role of capitalism, and they have in effect conceded the point. And again, it's ethics behind it all. And they have rejected intellectualism as such. If these fancy ideas of Marxism and intersectionalism and postmodernism are coming from the universities, and they have some feeling that, no, that's wrong, that's unfair, that won't work, it's unjust, their thought is to go anti-intellectual. Their thought is to go to some folksy Cracker Barrel wisdom, usually the religious concepts that they were taught in the past. But those religious concepts are altruist collectivist too, and are providing no real justification. So this anti-intellectualism that the right is embracing is a sort of capitulation that ideas and the intellect and theory belongs to the left, and they've basically thrown in the towel when it comes to intellectualism, unfortunately, too often. And so this sort of folksy God family tradition, weren't things great in the old days, general mystique is what controls conservatism. They don't have a principled defense. They don't understand capitalism as the system of rights, as the system of progress, as the system of the future at all. You look at Trump. Trump outspent Obama even before COVID came along, and even with a Republican Congress. Trump caved in on free trade, which used to at least be something nominally that the Republican Party was in favor of. Trump said that everyone has a right to medical care. I'm just going to do it a little differently than Obama. I'm just going to provide medical care to everybody through a different means. Well, when you've done that, you've conceded everything. And anti-intellectualism, of course, it's the same sort of, what he's trying to do is say, well, Americans were always socialists in their heart. You see, we just want to do socialism efficiently and effectively. No, each time we turn around, the Republicans leave us with bigger government, more regulation, less capitalism. How does that happen? How does it happen that at the end of every Republican administration in my country, government is bigger, just as it is under the Democrats? Well, they're both arguing on the same premise. The Republicans have in effect conceded long ago the idea that government has a right and a duty and a responsibility, and the only moral politician is a politician who's willing to spend other people's money for some benevolent project. And they're the hero, not the Elon Musks or the Steve Jobses or the Jeff Bezoses. The heroes are the politicians willing to spend the money that somebody else has produced, the wealth that somebody else has produced. They're our ethical heroes. Because after all, we'd rather be fair and equitable than even have the richest society that we could have. That's what they say.
At the end of the essay, she talks about blasting the enemy's philosophical base. Could you comment a bit on that? And maybe could you also comment on other people that usually they align objectivism to, I think wrongfully, and that's libertarians, because I think that they have a base that is very different to objectivism.
Yes.
Specifically more relativism and
Yes.
sometimes weird epistemology. Could you comment on that?
Oh, very much so. Libertarian intellectuals, I mean, the great libertarian intellectual Murray Rothbard believed Christianity was perfectly consistent with libertarianism. He wanted to reach out to Christians, sincere Christians. See, once you've done that, you're saying that libertarianism is consistent with any moral philosophy. Once you've said that, game over. Game over. And libertarians who are ethical and philosophical relativists are the least likely to succeed in getting anyone on their side. It will take moral intransigence. It will take moral confidence. It will take seizing the moral high ground, knowing that we're right morally. And to do that, we have to blast and obliterate the idea that human beings are, in effect, slaves, at least a little bit slaves to their community, that they have duties that they have to pay back from the time they're born. No. The only way to respond is with a very specific kind of moral code, and a very specific kind of moral code that rests on a very specific approach to epistemology. If you're not oriented to this world and the facts of this world, you got no chance. If you do not morally defend profit, selfishness, in effect, the right of every individual to live for his or her own sake, you've conceded the whole case, and capitalism can never really be defended. It'll be one form of compromise with slavery or another form of compromise with slavery, until and unless the right of every individual to exist for his or her own sake is regarded as a moral absolute. We have to blast away the notion that some slavery is okay, that it's okay to steal the profits from a rich, productive person, even though he did it all voluntarily and legally. We have a right to steal from him because there's some need in the world. Until that notion that need justifies theft is obliterated, until the notion that individuals don't have a right to live for their own sake, that there's something wrong with selfishness and the profit motive. See, Ayn Rand understood that capitalism has to be defended on the profit motive. Selfishness, properly understood, is what has to be defended, not selfishness in the caricature way that most ethical thinkers look at it as, but real selfishness, a defense of reason, a defense of life on earth.
I think Christianity is compatible with anarchism and all the atrocities that it follows. And I think that's one of the reasons why libertarians are seeing lately the Middle Ages with this kind of awe.
Oh, yeah. They'll defend the Middle Ages. They'll defend Irish anarchism in the Dark Ages. They'll defend, and it may have been a better society before the Vikings got there. I don't know. But they'll defend Native American tribalism. I've heard libertarians do that all over the place. They're not defenders of civilization. They're not defenders of reason or progress. And anarchist libertarians are obviously enemies of reason and progress. Right? And that is perfectly consistent with primordial mysticism. Oh, yeah. They want a world, in effect, of gang warfare, which is, in effect, the world that socialism demands anyway, right?
Yes. And I just have one question left. Um, if one really wants to defend capital, I mean, then that's something you have already touched. If one really wants to defend capitalism, what should one do? What if I want, if I myself want to, what are the steps that I should be taking for defending capitalism?
Well, the most powerful force in human history is philosophy. Human beings are rational beings. It is their only way of knowing. It is their basic tool of survival. It is philosophy, which is the one subject of thought which covers the most ground. And significantly here, the methodological grounds of knowing and the ethical grounds that determine our values. And so it is philosophy that has gotten us into this situation, and it is only philosophy that can get us out of this situation. Economists have long, and historians have long since proved the unprecedented and unparalleled achievements of a comparatively free market. It's not a question of facts. You can corner just about any educated leftist or rightist on that point. It's a question of ethics. It's a question of selfishness and inequality and fairness. It is the ethical area that needs correction. And to get our ethics straight, we have to get our epistemology straight. So the defense of capitalism is primarily, I'm going to say this may not be immediately obvious to everyone. The defense of capitalism is primarily an epistemological question. Next, an ethical question. One, the role of reason, the role of facts in determining this. Two, the right of an individual to live for his or her own sake. So the only way to defend capitalism is by educational means, by propagandistic means, and it takes a long time to do that. But the reason why the right has capitulated for more than a century now is because they have basically conceded the ethical and philosophical direction of the culture. They've been simply playing catch up to the overwhelming collectivism and mysticism that swept over the world in the 20th century and is still sweeping over us in the 21st. And so the only answer is a strong, principled, philosophical defense of capitalism. And for that, we need intellectuals, a cadre of thinkers, philosophers, not just economists, but moral thinkers who can defend freedom, the individual, and reason itself.
Thank you, James. So with that being said, I don't know if you want to comment something that we didn't comment on the course of the talk.
I know I sound like a broken record sometimes with my final comments, but once more we see Ayn Rand's prophetic capacity, her prescience, the X-ray vision with which she saw the future. Today, Western countries, the conservatives or the so-called conservatives, whatever they call themselves, will complain about the less consistent ones. In my country, Republicans in name only, the rhinos, the Me Tooers. But isn't that the inevitable situation that there must always be? But she saw this coming a mile on. That it was our friends, not so much our enemies, at least our alleged friends and claimed friends, who are really undermining freedom and the free market more than our worst, most consistent communist opponents.
Thank you. So with that being said, I think there weren't super chats for today, sadly. But I thank you very much, James, for these talks, the ones that you do on Saturdays, only for members, please.
Oh, this Saturday we're talking sex.
I'm sorry?
This Saturday it's about sex.
Oh yes, this Saturday is about sex.
You may not want to miss that one. That's going to be fun.
Yes, it's going to be fun. You want to get the scoop on what are we going to talk about sex and why? Please become a member.
Right.
I'm sorry?
Sex as metaphysical.
Exactly. Imagine that. What does that mean?
Right.
So please, people, try to, if you like these conversations, become a member. Memberships start on £10 a month. And with that being said, see you next Wednesday.
Take care.